In this episode, I sit down with former sheriff and founder of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, Sheriff Mack. What I loved about this conversation was that it truly connects local action with global impact. Sheriff Mack, even though he was called into service through a struggle for local authority and even won in the Supreme Court, is now an awesome threat to the New World Order agenda being enforced by globalist institutions like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. Unsurprisingly, Mack's battle to defend the Constitution and the sovereignty of a sheriff's power has been met with narrative warfare, screaming about white nationalism and white supremacy. What interests me is the way in which these same tactics are copy-pasted from Western nation to Western nation, ensuring that anyone in the US, Canada, Britain, and beyond who pushes back against the globalist effort to erode national sovereignty is attacked using critical race theory propaganda. Here in Canada, the same playbook is being applied. The state media is colluding with groups like the Canadian Anti-Hate Network to build a false narrative about the rise in far-right extremism, and they're targeting groups much like those led by Sheriff Mack in America. Local warriors who promote national pride, national sovereignty, personal empowerment through fitness, minimalist government intervention, and democratic rights in the face of globalist overreach. As is often the case, Canada has a chance to look south of the border to understand where this is going, with the recent indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center, revealing that they were engaged in a massive scandal to socially engineer racist tension by funding groups like the KKK while standing against them. This is especially relevant because Sheriff Mack has long been a target of the SPLC, meaning that their indictment is an important example of these winds of change. I hope you enjoy Sheriff Mack's fierce wisdom, insight, and his phenomenal call to action. He has been in this war for human freedom longer than most of us, and I think he truly adds valuable options when it comes to fighting back. Join Sheriff Mack's mission at cspoa.org. Sheriff Mack, welcome to Subversive Clarity. Why don't you just give people a brief overview of who you are and what you represent, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, my name's Richard Mack, and I go by Sheriff Mack. That's my nom de guerre, nom de plume. I served as the Graham County Sheriff where I grew up, the town I grew up in, the county I grew up in, both my wife and me. And that was an amazing, miraculous time in my life. But I grew up in Southeast Arizona. My wife grew up in Southeast Arizona. And then we met when I was in college, and I thought she was in college, but she was just a high school cheerleader at the time, and I didn't know her. I knew her older brothers because she was so young. I didn't know who she was. And that was really part of my miracle that I married her, and her parents and family were very constitutional oriented, and they started teaching me the Constitution, and that's where I got a lot of my education. And I sure didn't learn the Constitution in school, but
Yes.
most of us don't get that part anyway. But I wanted to get in the FBI. I actually went back to college after my wife and I got married, and I decided that I wanted to get in the FBI, follow my dad's footsteps. My dad was an FBI agent, and boy, am I glad that never worked out. So, but while I was working my way through college, I had a part-time job with Provo Police Department, and I was a meter maid. And the official term for meter maid is parking enforcement cadet. And so I went around marking tires and giving parking tickets all day long. And I've repented since then. And I finally came out with what traffic tickets are. Traffic tickets are nothing more than taxation through citation. And they really have very little to do with public safety, but a lot to do with public revenue. And so I didn't want to be a tax collector. I wanted to be a public servant. And there was a time where about after 2.5 years, I was in law enforcement that I had, and I just served a year as an undercover narcotics agent. And that was very life-changing. because I never did drugs. The only time, now get this, Simon, the only time I ever smoked marijuana was when I was a cop, when I was
Oh,
undercover. That's the only
wow.
time ever. Never smoked it uh, before, never smoked it since. I was busy in high school with sports, choir, uh, show choir, student government. I was class president 3 years out of the 4 years of our class of 71. And I was just too busy. And I loved life. I didn't need anything else. I didn't need beer. I didn't need, and I hate beer with a passion. But none of that ever appealed to me. And sports and school and church, they appealed to me. So, um, but there was something that happened to me when I was writing a lady a ticket one day, and it came to me that what I was doing was wrong. She's the one that ran the stop sign, but I was in the wrong. Just writing her a ticket without any compassion or humanity at all. And so I decided that I was going to study the Constitution, and I was not, and I was going to actually keep my oath. I swore an oath in God's name that I would uphold, defend, protect, and preserve the United States Constitution. And I never saw anybody in law enforcement or the judicial branch or the legislative branch. I never saw anybody that talked about the Constitution, talked about the limitations that the Constitution applied to us. And I just said, why? I thought it was the foundation of our government. And so I made a commitment, and I made a promise to myself that I would never be on the wrong side again, and that I would be a guard of the Constitution, and that I would know what the Constitution said. And so that led me to running for moving home and running for sheriff. And that's a big long string of miracles as well. Um, so my wife and I decided to move home after 12 years with Provo Police Department. And I did everything in law enforcement imaginable, everything, except I never shot anybody and I never beat anybody up, ever, not even close. And so I won my election in 1988. I got reelected in 1992. And then in 1993, the Brady Bill came out. And my wife and I were channel surfing, and we saw Bill Clinton sign the Brady Bill into law. I don't know why, but he was left-handed, as you'll recall, and he signed it with 13 pens. And I don't know why he used 13 different pens. I don't remember that. I just thought it was silly. But he said something there that I'll never forget. While he was doing that, he said, the Brady Bill will make our country so safe that even our nation's police officers won't need to carry guns anymore. Yeah,
Wow.
That's Billy Bob Clinton for you.
Hmm.
And then on January 21st, 1994, we had a Sheriff's Association meeting in Phoenix, and 3 agents of the BATF were there, and they brought us each a 25-page document detailing our marching orders from Congress and the White House, telling us what we had to do to enforce the Brady Bill for the federal government. For free, we had to pay for it all, we had to fund it all, and if we didn't do it, now get this, everybody, you got to get this. The Brady Bill threatened to arrest us if we failed to comply.
Hmm.
Arrest us. And you never
Wow.
heard so much cussing in your life when the sheriffs saw that part. And it wasn't coming from me. I was the youngest sheriff in the state at the time. I just barely won my second term. And I wanted these guys to tell me what we should be doing. These very seasoned professional sheriffs. And boy, they were throwing F bombs like crazy. And so at the end of the day, though, every single one of them acquiesced, all of them. So there's only 15 counties in Arizona. 13 sheriffs were at this meeting. All of them acquiesced except me. And I told them, I said, you guys already convinced me we shouldn't be doing this. And just so you know, I am not going to do it. And they just kind of looked at me, yeah, right. What are you going to do? Get arrested? And so by the time I got home, it hit me that I was going to sue my own government. And that scared me a great deal. And so I just said, well, full steam ahead. We're going to do it. And when I told my wife about it, she didn't understand any of it. But she says, maybe now we know why you were supposed to be sheriff. And then 2 days later, I told my mom what I was doing about suing the federal government. And she said the exact same thing that my wife said. I guess we know now why you were supposed to be sheriff. And so a local newscaster at KATO radio, he and I knew each other well, and he asked me to be on the show. And he said, "Do you have anything to talk about?" And I go, "Yeah, the Brady Bill." And I told him what I was going to do, sue the federal government over this Brady Bill. And he goes, after the show, he goes, "Do you mind if I put this on the AP wire?" I said, "I don't, I don't care. That doesn't. It's no big deal." We took 300 calls worldwide the next 2 days from the international and national media, and I was shocked. But I guess the David and Goliath story that this brought on, a small town sheriff taking on the federal government, the Clinton administration, no less. And I didn't know what to do, how to do it. I just know I was going to do it. So I called the NRA and I told them who I was and what I wanted to do. And the attorney for the NRA, Richard Gardner, the next line out of his mouth changed my life forever. And he said, "Sheriff, we've already been preparing the paperwork on this case, and we've been praying that you would call." And I said, "I'm not even a member of the NRA. You don't even know me." And he goes, "We don't know you, but we know we needed a sheriff. And you're the first one to call." So I said, "Great, let's do it." So I also retained my own lawyer, Dave Hardy from Tucson, and 6 other sheriffs from across the country. This was nationwide. It wasn't just Arizona sheriffs. It was all sheriffs in the country. 6 other sheriffs joined me in this lawsuit. Uh, Only one from Texas. And there's 256 sheriffs in Texas. Only one, J.R. Coog, God rest his soul. And then Sheriff Prince was the second one to file from Montana. And he and I ended up at the Supreme Court in December of 1996. Then on June 27, 1997, we're coming up to our anniversary here, the 30-year anniversary next year. And Sheriff Prince and I ended up at the Supreme Court together. And indeed, on June 27, 1997, Justice Scalia, writing for the majority, said the sheriffs were correct. The federal government exceeded its authority, and they have no authority to commandeer the office of sheriff or any other state office for that matter. And it's our job, according to this decision, and everybody can get a copy of it. This is a highlighted version of my Supreme Court case available at cspoa.org. Folks, this is very small, fits in your shirt pocket. It's worth its weight in gold. Everyone that dreamed of having a Supreme Court decision on the side of liberty and state sovereignty and states' rights and local autonomy, folks, this is it. And you need to get a few for yourselves and your family, but you need to pass these around to city councils, county commissioners, your county attorney, and your county sheriff. And this is absolutely vital to the cause of liberty. And this is one of the best liberty tools you'll ever see. And Scalia took us through a history lesson on this. And he said, quoting the Federalist Papers several times, he said, "Hence, a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other." And folks, your sheriff is a different government, and he's your ultimate protector. And this is why I formed the CSPOA, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. It's an organization for the people, because when government becomes venal and oppressive, to whom can we turn for peace, safety, and protection and liberty? And that's your county sheriff. And that's why it's vital that you, all of you, American people, get involved. We have a branch of the CSPOA that's just for people. It's called the CSPOA Posse. Become a member of that. Go to our website, cspoa.org, and become a member of the CSPOA. Then we will train you every Wednesday. We have our training seminar. We will train you how to work with your sheriff and how to form a posse with him.
Very interesting. So, when we look back on what Bill Clinton was up to, we didn't really have the
Yeah.
context that we have now. But now
Mm.
so much has been exposed in terms of not just government overreach, but those within the federal government that were enacting those kinds of overreach being tied to, foreign attempts to affect the United States, like foreign forms of infiltration or forms of globalist governance. There's been a
Yeah.
lot of erosion of national sovereignty by giving up power to these supranational entities. So I think we have a lot more context on what kind of agenda Bill Clinton was a part of. And now that we have that, I'm very intrigued by the way you've been attacked and some of the narratives here. So I know that they framed you. Let's see, I found a quote from the Southern Poverty. I mean, they recently SPCA.
SPLC, but yeah, and now the SPLC has been indicted for exactly what they've been doing to me for 30
Yeah.
years.
And I want to get into that. So they originally tried to tie you to white supremacy through Randy Weaver, which I mean, it's fascinating considering everything that's unfolded. So, I mean, how did that all start for you in terms of them trying to place you into a racist narrative? What was that like for you when they began those attacks?
First of all, that's a real cut to the way I was raised. My mother did not raise us like that. Everyone was welcome in our home. I played basketball with Mexicans. I played basketball with blacks. I played with football with the same Mormons, Jews, Christians, everybody. I grew up believing that we were all the same and that we were all equal, except Danny Smith, God rest his soul, he was a much better basketball player than I was. And he was a good man. Good, I absolutely loved him. And Willie Scroggins, good man, good people. And look, I was a pacifist, except when it came to football, I was pretty mean, and I was a good football player. I was a good basketball player. I love sports, but I'm telling you right now, it taught me how to be a team player, and that's with everybody. And so this whole crap and framing and the destruction of what my mom taught us to be was they didn't care. They didn't care how I was raised. I didn't even know that Mrs. Greenbaum, I didn't know that was a Jew name. I didn't know that was Jewish. I didn't know she was Jewish. I didn't know anything about that. She was just our English teacher. No one said, "Oh, hey, did you know Mrs. Greenbaum's a Jew?" And I would have said, if that had ever been said, I would have said, "So,
Yeah.
you're a Mormon. So you're a Catholic. So what?" It didn't matter to us. And no one ever brought that up in our community that Mrs. Greenbaum is a Jew. She was strict and we all loved her. And Mr. Hershey, I didn't know he was a Jew until like 20 or 30 years after I was out of high school when people started calling me racist. And I said, how do I know? How do I know who a Jew is? They look like anybody else to me. The students in our school, Jeannie Bellman, okay, I didn't know she was a Jew. And once she said she was, and I go, oh, okay. Well, nice to know you. How about we go up this weekend? So it was so stupid
Yeah.
that these charges and the accusations against me, but the Southern Poverty Law Center doesn't care. And I found out the reason they kept going after me and saying that I was a white supremacist and that I was anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic and all this other stuff was to do what they got indicted for, and that is to scare their donors and supporters into believing that I'm this horrible person and that we formed a paramilitary organization called CSPOA. So they would use me, they would destroy me in any way they could to promote their own funding and to get donations. And now I want to make sure that the DOJ knows I'm ready to testify on their behalf because Southern Poverty Law Center and I went the rounds several times. And I
Yeah.
even filed a suit against them one time, but they got it thrown out on a technicality. And I still disagree with the technicality, but the judges are always on their side. I don't know why. But but this organization is absolutely evil, and their sister company, the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, Same thing. And ADL has
Yeah.
called me anti-Semitic and racist and white supremacist also. And I said, I called them and I said, talk to me. You guys never talk to me, but you put out all this information against me. Why don't we talk? Why don't we have a public forum? And SPLC and ADL will not do that. I've challenged them to open debate lots of times. They won't do it. And
Well,
so,
with this
but the
indictment,
only other thing is, yes, I knew
yeah,
Randy Weaver,
right.
and I didn't.
Yes.
And Randy Weaver was not a racist. He
Yeah.
was a separate. He was a white separatist. In other words, he believed that whites should marry whites, blacks should marry blacks, Mexicans should marry Mexicans, and so on. That's what his belief was. But he did not believe that the white race was supreme to anybody else's. He just believed that we should all marry into our own. But that had nothing to do. I don't care what he believed. I don't care even if he was a racist, which he wasn't. What happened to him and his family should never happen. You don't get, the government doesn't get to murder people because they're racists. Okay? We
Yeah.
don't. And what happened to him and his family, I met him one time at a preparedness show, and he said, Sheriff Mack, I've been wanting to meet you for years. You know the first thing he told me? If you had been my sheriff, my son and my wife would still be alive today. And you know
Wow.
what? He's right. Because I wouldn't have allowed the federal government to go in and do what they did at Ruby Ridge. Or if I had been the sheriff in Waco, David Koresh and 89 other people wouldn't have been killed by the federal government.
So, the Southern Poverty Law Center being indicted, I think it exposes a lot of layers in terms of the struggle that you're caught up in here. So,
Yeah.
not only are they obviously caught in a scheme where they're creating their own funding to a certain extent, but to me, this looks like a kind of warfare where they're trying to foment a color revolution using communist style tactics, right? They create racial division. I mean, look at
Right.
the BLM riots, that occurred
Right.
in 2020. They were a huge part of that. And the destabilization of a nation through creating racial tension is a well-known tactic. But what's
Yeah.
interesting to me is that it's not just the Southern Poverty Law Center. It seems to be that they're connected to other entities. For example, they've worked with the United Nations. They've worked closely with George Soros. They've worked with all these entities that seem interested in destabilizing the United States. And
Right.
I think now that we have all these layers understood, you know, there's a larger war going on here on a global scale. So interestingly enough, the same thing is happening in Canada. So groups in Canada that are promoting local sovereignty, that are promoting public
Mhm.
action, that are promoting sovereignty from government overreach, that look to develop communities that can be self-sustaining, they're being framed by the media in Canada as white supremacists, like racist nationalists. So the same
Mhm.
tactics are going on there, and so this seems to be a pattern, I think, in lots of different Western nations. So I think that the
Mhm.
fight that you're engaged in is important, not just in America, but it seems to be playing a role in this larger struggle for national sovereignty versus forms of global governance. Have you come across any of those layers in your struggle?
Well, yeah, of course. Yes, absolutely. And a lot of these other terms like Christian identity, uh, I was actually asked to speak at a Christian church once. And then I think it was SPLC accused me of Christian identity. And I said, what does that mean? Is there a problem with Christian identity? Okay, they identify as Christians. He goes, oh no, it's white identity as well, and blah blah blah. And they try to. So I called the pastor back and I said, "Are you this and this?" He goes, "No." But anyway, uh, I guess that's how naive I was, and because I just believed that everybody loved each other and we had a right to believe what we wanted, and as long as you're not hurting anybody else, that's fine. But this whole thing about nationalists and nationalism and national citizen and whatnot, and it took me a while to learn some of this. I thought we were all Americans and that we all wanted to be free, and that if there's no such thing as freedom for me but not for thee, that it can never be that way. Okay. And God-given liberty has to be for everyone. There can be no exceptions. None. Even for people that I think are really dangerous, and even religions like uh, Islam, the Muslims. I really believe it's really dangerous that uh, your Bible can say it's okay to kill people if they don't agree with your jihadist movement, or they don't believe the same way. And I actually was a teacher for a while, and I had some Muslim students in my class. And I will tell you, I was very close to them, and they were close to me. We loved each other. And I talked to one of their mothers once, and I actually made the mistake of reaching out and shaking her hand. And she says, I know you don't know any better, but I'm not supposed to shake your hand. I said, okay. I said, but what about this? What about your religion? And do you? She says, there's lots of Muslims that don't believe that, and my children don't believe that, and we've raised them to be respectful and tolerant. But I said, but is that the way your most of your religion is? And she goes, no. Well, I believe in everything else, but I do not believe in that part about killing my children if they get too Western, or killing anyone who doesn't believe us. But the global movement that you brought up, I believe that one of the biggest dangers in the world is the United Nations, and that the United States is still a part of that farce. Really worries me. But I do appreciate Trump cutting back our dues to the United Nations, because we were funding like a third of the United Nations when it had over 100 countries in it. And
Yeah.
America's been doing that way too much. And I really believe, in fact, I have a book coming out in a couple of days, and I'll let you know when it comes out, but it's called The Democrat Murder of America. And I believe that the Democrat Party is 10 times worse than the Republicans. They're both corrupt to a certain extent. But the Democrat Party believes in lying, stealing, cheating, and killing. They do, and they will. And they've done it for over a century. And so the history is all there in the book about what the Democrat Party has done to black people, to slavery, and how they supported all that, and now how they've tried to go after Trump and the other murders that they've committed, Vince Foster and uh, Dorothy Dorothy Kilgallen. And Dorothy Kilgallen was absolutely an atrocity. And if you don't know her, she was a regular guest on What's My Line. But she was a very dogged reporter, and she started investigating the JFK assassination. And she was really getting into some stuff. And she actually was the only reporter to interview Jack Ruby. And she really came up with some hard stuff. And she called the Warren Commission report a joke. It was laughable. And she was right, because I investigated that too. And when my dad was in FBI, I turned to my dad. I said, Dad, have you seen this? And I was just, um, when that came out, I was like a freshman in high school. I said, Dad, did you see this Warren Commission report thing? And he goes, oh yeah, yeah. He says, I really respect it. I think they did a good job. I said, Dad, no, they didn't. And so he and I had an argument about that. But she was killed the exact same way that Marilyn Monroe was killed. And Marilyn Monroe did not commit suicide. Neither did Jeffrey Epstein. And neither did Vince Foster. And when Dorothy Kilgallen died, they go, oh, what are we going to say? It was just the same as Marilyn, that she committed suicide with barbiturates and alcohol. So they said, oh, it was just an accident. But guess what? Simon, every bit of her notes and reports about the JFK assassination disappeared the night of her death. They were stolen. So we know why she was killed. We just don't know who, because no one ever investigated it. And that's in our
You know,
book.
that's great. I look forward to the book because I think, there seems to be with the Democratic Party and even again, in other nations like Canada with the Liberals, there's manipulation of history. There's this deep, deep manipulation of our history to
Mhm.
promote an agenda. And it's so interesting that the Democrats are the ones claiming to be fighting things like racism while their history is tied to the KKK, while they're
Yeah.
funding groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center. So they have this really twisted view of history, even though,
Well, look at right now, Simon. They're all anti-Semitic for some
yeah,
reason because they're poor. They want to support Palestine
yeah,
and Pakistan, and so oh well, we have to decide now. You stupid idiots! You didn't have to decide anything. You don't need to be racist against anyone. So
yeah,
now Harvard and all these other schools are being anti-Semitic, and the Jewish kids at these schools. And does the Southern Poverty Law Center go after them? Does the ADL go after? Oh no, because they're buddies. That's where their big donations come from. It's all such a joke. And it's
yeah.
it's the cruelty of the Democrat Party that has accepted all of this. And they have always been racist. They are now, and they're big. Who's the big icon president that the Democrat Party loves the most? FDR. FDR was
Yeah,
the biggest racist there ever was. And in
yeah.
fact, now you had Jesse Owens, who was the greatest athlete in the world, shoved it in the face of Hitler at the 36 Olympics, and then FDR refused to have him come to the White House when the rest of the Olympians came to the White House to celebrate their victory. And this is the Democrat Party at its highest. This is the Democrat Party. They don't care who's racist. They don't care who gets murdered as long as it's part of their agenda.
I think what's so dangerous is that they don't just represent corruption that seeks to control the United States, but
Yeah,
corruption that seeks to allow outside entities to take control of the United States. And it's so much worse. It's so much more treasonous than just wanting to control the nation. And you know,
absolutely.
I think it positions your work. I think really importantly, when we look at this struggle to try to create global forms of governance that erode nations. So you have like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum who are seeking to increase their capacity to govern the nations of the world.
Yeah.
And then you look at this struggle for national sovereignty. A lot of this does come down to citizens being able to take meaningful local action to engage in their sovereignty. But the struggle here, I think, is then reconciling this tension. And I'm curious about your insights on this. So, you know, we want to be able to take local action. We want to be, I think, sovereign as much as sovereign as we can. We want minimal government interference in our lives. At the same
Right.
time, one of the ways of defending a nation against groups like the World Economic Forum and the United Nations is a strong national will. So how do you
Yeah.
reconcile, the pushback against federal overreach and really becoming local in action with, building a national will that is able to push back against these globalist influences?
Well, the first thing is James Madison said one of our national conferences was actually a takeoff on this. Erecting the Barriers was the name of our conference about 5 years ago. And we just had a conference in Washington State because they're destroying the office of sheriff there. The state actually made a law in Washington State that this bureaucracy, a new bureaucracy, gets to decide the qualifications for anyone wanting to run for sheriff. So they decide who can even run for sheriff. And then if a sheriff does anything wrong, they can remove the sheriff and pick someone else. And so that Washington State's doing that because there were so many sheriffs that didn't go along with their COVID-19 mandates. The farce and the lies of that. And we're
Yep.
proud of the 500, 600 sheriffs nationwide who refused to enforce COVID-19 mandates. That's the answer to your question. That
Mm.
the sheriffs of this country will do what Madison said. We can safely rely on local authorities to erect the barriers against the encroachments of the national authority. The national authority is usually coming there in the name of the UN or other globalist ideas. And so this is where we, the people, must form alliance with our sheriff and other local officials as well. We'd love to have county commissioners on board. We'd love to have the county attorney, but he doesn't know anything because he went to law school. He doesn't know anything about the Constitution. That's really degrading to that position, but they don't. And actually, we've had a couple of county attorneys tell their sheriffs that they didn't have the authority to keep their oath of office. They don't have the authority to keep their word, their solemn promise and oath of allegiance to the Constitution. That's how funny these county attorneys are and DAs. But the whole thing boils down to a sheriff who understands his oath, understands his duty to protect the Constitution, and thus protect the civil rights of all the people in his county. And so we could be like Sheriff Bob Songer out in Washington, who put Klickitat County in Washington State, who put all local officials and bureaucracies on notice that if they ever violate the Constitution in his county, he will take action against them. That is exactly what we want nationwide, so that your county can actually be a refuge, a sanctuary for the Constitution. And now that's what we're working on right now in Washington State to help their counties, where these sheriffs see the necessity now to combat their sanctuary state status with a sanctuary of their own, and that is that this county is a sanctuary for the Constitution, not just for the Second Amendment, but for the entire Bill of Rights and the Constitution. That's how we're combating all of that. But I'm going to tell you, Simon, if the American people do not join us with this, it's not going to work. Jefferson warned us that an educated and vigilant citizenry is essential to the cause of liberty. And we're offering that to all of your supporters, all your listeners, everybody a part of this show. We're offering it to every American. Join us in this most holy cause, and we are solution oriented. We're solution oriented. This is the cause of liberty, and we are focused on an effective and peaceful solution while it still can remain peaceful. But again, folks, if you're just watching this for entertainment and you're not doers of the word, instead of just hearers of the word, that's a scripture. If you got to be doers. And so we're asking you to be a doer and join us at cspoa.org. To join our posse is a whopping $11 a month. Okay. We understand that might cost you a cup of coffee a week or a month or whatever it is. But as part of the holy cause of liberty, what did the founding fathers say? We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and sacred honor. Look, nobody's asking for your fortune. We're asking you that we help and bless each other. So you help keep us funded, and we help you stay free. And we actually build those defenses right inside your community with you and your sheriff. And if your sheriff's on board, I guarantee you, we're going to win this, because every time a sheriff has stood in our country, he wins. And let me give you a real quick story on that. I call this the tale of two sheriffs. Sheriff Chronister in Florida actually arrested Pastor Rodney Howard Brown for having church during COVID.
Oh,
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, he arrested him. However, just the opposite occurred in New Mexico with Sheriff Glenn Hamilton. Okay? Pastor Caleb Cooper went to his sheriff and said, "Sheriff, I am not going to close my church down. Not one day. Nothing. Not ever. Not for 1 minute. What I need to know from you, sir." And he said, and he conditioned that. He qualified that. He said, "The government does not run my church. Jesus Christ runs our church. And I need to know from you what you will do to protect us and keep us open." And Glenn Hamilton, Sheriff Hamilton, said, "If it takes having to go to jail myself, then so be it. But I will do everything in my power to protect you." So the sheriff's office was notified that the state police was coming to shut Caleb Cooper's church down. The sheriff met them at the church, and he came out and told all the state police that he had just deputized every member of that church and that they were under his authority and that they would stay open and he asked them all to leave. They left, never came back, and Pastor Cooper never shut down one single second of any Sunday because we had a sheriff that knew his job, had been trained with us several times, and he was courageous enough to stand against the government. And God bless those who have. And we have sheriffs that have stood to help Amish farmers because local government wants to shut them down because they won't pasteurize their milk. Folks, that's up to them, that's up to the Amish, and it's up to you if you want to buy and purchase organic milk and dairy products. It's not up to the government, but we have the FDA going in and arresting. Sam Gerard went to prison for 6 years because he didn't get permission from the FDA. Folks, the Democrats are going to continue and bureaucrats are going to continue to attack good, honest American people unless we create the defenses. And that's we the people and the sheriff. And folks, I've got all sorts of different stories about evidence about this. I know the federal government doesn't want to battle with the sheriffs. There's lots of history about that. Now we need you on board.
You know, it's really interesting. I think a lot of people, they envision the idea of the national will, coming through things like a federal election, and that's how we mobilize the national will. And I think a lot of people do tend to view it that way. And it is a really, I think,
Yeah.
helpful
Yeah. How's that
reframing.
been working out for us?
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's a huge difference between that and mobilizing, your sheriffs and taking this local action and recognizing, like, your COVID story is great because we know that COVID came down from the World Health Organization and these entities that sought to infiltrate all these different Western nations. So it's
Mhm.
interesting to have the sheriffs being able to stand up against those and to have those actual stories of genuine victories between a sheriff and these COVID mandates that were created supranationally.
Yep.
I think that's really, really effective storytelling because it helps people understand that they don't need the federal government to defend them. Even though it's great that Trump is taking, the United States away from the World Health Organization, the United Nations, like that is
Yeah.
really great. And I think it does represent the will of the people in that way. But I think your stories give people a much more direct means of action, and it's much more empowering to recognize that you can manage this locally. Because when people get lost in the internet algorithm and they look at all these
Right.
stories of these big globalist agendas, a lot of the time
Right.
people feel really disempowered and they struggle with it.
Right.
But I think you're giving people a path that is very effective and empowering.
It is. And we take back America, folks, in our own community, not in Washington, D.C. Look, Trump has done some good things, especially getting us out of a lot of different uh, UN stuff, WHO, and all of that. That is fantastic. I never thought I'd see the day. Now he just needs to take it a step further and get us completely out of the UN. He's already recognized how useless it is. Useless it is. What has it done to help any of the peaceful efforts we're trying? What have they ever done to try to get Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz? Nothing. They don't do anything. And they still side with China and Russia on just about everything. No, they are a communist organization, and we have been fighting communism for the last 100 years in America. Fought
Yeah.
5 wars, including the Cold War, to get rid of communism, and now the Democrats are embracing it full force. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
spitting on the graves of the military, the soldiers in our country that gave their lives to defend our country against communism. And so socialism, number one socialist, Adolf Hitler. Democrats
Yeah.
don't care. They love socialism. They just don't. But they want to call Trump Hitler. They're the ones that do the socialistic programs that Hitler espoused, and then
Yeah.
Stalin and Pol Pot and Khrushchev. Khrushchev said that we would be killed and destroyed from within. And sure enough, that's what's happening. We don't need Khrushchev or all these other horrible communist dictators anymore. The Democrat Party's doing it for them. Everything that
Yeah.
everything that Khrushchev promised would happen to America is happening now from within the Democrat Party. Yeah.
100%. And I think this is important for people to recognize that the communism, um, that of the past, it was a threat in certain ways, but it has really modified itself. And now what we're up against, all the claims against you as a white supremacist, those are all based on Marxist theories, right? It's
Yeah.
all different forms of neo-Marxism. So we're constantly in
Mhm.
this struggle with these different forms of communism now. But what's
Mhm.
different now is that the communism of the modern age is tied into these globalist entities. We're not looking at a foreign nation. We're looking at larger bodies that have power outside of nations that are really pushing a form of Marxism. And
Right.
to me, understanding it through that lens of warfare has been really helpful. Like looking at the work of General Flynn and the late great Boone Cutler. The way that they have been able to frame things and to look at the evolution of war and communism. I think that view really, really helps people understand. And I'm very interested in how this plays out on the global scale because for me, my audience is about half American, half Canadian. And
Oh,
so
okay.
I have people coming from both sides of it. And it's been very intriguing because there's been all this drudged up alleged tension between Canada and America. But to me,
Right.
it's all been narrative warfare.
We have Canadian members. We
Oh,
do.
tell me about
Uh,
that.
Yeah, and they can, and all of you can still join. It's a little bit difficult to get some of our policies implemented there because you don't really have sheriffs,
Yeah.
but you need to start working with local law enforcement in small communities, especially, and start seeing how much of this you can start implementing in Canada. I'm very much for that. My son-in-law is from Alberta,
Okay. Yeah, I was born in
Cardston,
Alberta.
uh, Cardston actually, if you know where Cardston is,
I don't
and
actually.
yeah, so folks, we love Canada, and you can still be a part of us, and you can join and still be a part of our posse. You can still make donations, whatever you want to do there. But we do have Canadians. We have also a couple from Germany that are
Wow.
members, several from London, several from Australia. But folks, this we believe in worldwide freedom, and we invite all of you to be a part of this and to get trained and to see what we're trying to do that can be implemented with your police officers in your neck of the woods. What
Interesting.
what Canada did during COVID and arresting that pastor
Yes.
and some others were absolutely horrible. But you'll remember some of the protests that happened in Canada. Those were
Yep.
very effective. And
Yep.
and so we'd love to have you on board. So please do. And it's we're all in this together.
It's important because I think there is a drive. I know that in Canadian media right now, there's a lot of propaganda to get Canadians angry towards America, angry towards Trump, and it's all
Yeah,
based on false narratives. But I think it's
yeah.
so powerful that we see the larger enemy, that's really attacking all these different Western nations with the same tactics. That's why it interests me that groups doing similar work to you in Canada are being framed with these similar white supremacist narratives,
Oh, of
and I think the
course.
tactics are the same because we're all dealing with the same enemy. Um,
Folk, you know, the socialism and communism, folks, that we're now trying to embrace through the Democrat Party in America, uh, look at that. Do you really believe that socialism and communism are what made America great during the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? We became the most prosperous and free nation in world history. And now, oh, it's broke. It's broke because everybody's not equal. Everybody doesn't have equal stuff. That was never the intent that we all got equal stuff. Equal opportunity is the key to all of that. Your choice to run your own life is your choice, not government's. And anyone that believes that government should be the entity to take from the rich and give to the poor, that's not freedom. That is absolutely the worst form of government ever because the people that we're taking it from have the right to what? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the fruit of their labor belongs to them. Oh, well, they inherited it. Well, where did they get it? And and my inheritance is mine. It's not your, it doesn't belong to my neighbors. And do any of us have the right of any kind to go down the street where my neighbor has 3 cars and my neighbor over here to my right doesn't have a car at all. So 20 of us in the neighborhood go over to him and say, you have 3 cars and Sam over here doesn't have a car. We're going to take your car, one of your cars. You can choose which one, but no, we don't want that old jalopy. So of the other 2 that are nice cars, pick the one you want us to take to Sam. Does anybody have the right to do that? Then how does your government get it? The
Yeah, it's
people,
so
we the
important.
people bestow all political power and authority. How do we give our government something or delegate to our government to do something that we don't have the right to do? That's impossible. Do not support anything of the sort. We run our own lives. You know what? If I wanted to be a billionaire, I could have been. I look back at my life, I said, man, I wish I had a good retirement. I wish I had a retirement. I wish. I did exactly what I wanted to do in my life. I was a cop, I was a teacher, and I won a case at the United States Supreme Court. I changed history for our country. I wouldn't sell that for anything. I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was one of the most amazing times of my life with me and my wife, who I've been married to. Let's see, today's in 10 days from today, it'll be our 51st wedding anniversary. I love her. We did this together. We now do CSPOA together. This is this is what we have dedicated our lives to, folks. And this is what we will do until we die. This is our life to make sure that other people are free. We are here to make sure that no one is abused, no one is mistreated because of their race or color or creed or religion. No one. And the best way to do that is to build those defenses county by county and state by state.
You bring up a very important point because I think one of the larger, um, I guess, goals of all of this is to demoralize the nations. It's to demoralize the nation state. And when you look at the process of demoralization, you have to ask how do you reverse that? How do the people find morale again? How do they find that sense of purpose? And this is one of the things that I think has been so exciting about these times. I know we're living through a very sophisticated new kind of warfare, and it's an intense time to be alive, but it's so filled with purpose. And I think this is one of the greatest opportunities of our time, that the opportunity to serve, to be of service,
It
to
is.
find purpose. It's
Yep.
never been greater. And that
Yep.
is the call to become remoralized, to find that again. I think that is the best pushback against this demoralization in all of the
Yeah.
different nations that are facing this. And that's what I try to do. And I think, you're doing a great job at doing that. I help people finding purpose, and your story is one of great purpose. And I think a lot of youth really need to understand that. I think being
Yep.
young right now is very difficult in terms of purpose, finding purpose.
Well,
And
what you're really saying, Simon, is that there's hope.
yeah,
And I see that in our organization every day. And we hope that you will all feel the same. Join us. Look, there's no contract. If you don't like what we're doing, for heaven's sakes, quit your monthly payment. Don't send us donations. But you will see that what we're doing is working. And you can look in Washington State right now to see, because so far the sheriffs have won 2 different injunctions against the state government and the governor to doing what they're doing there. And we had our national conference there January 10th of this year. And guess who was our keynote speaker, Simon? General Flynn. And he and I are very
that's
good friends because we're part of the same movement. And
yes.
folks, we want you to be part of this as well.
I mean, General Flynn's mandate that local action equals national impact, I think, is a
That's what
really important.
we've said that before he did,
Yeah, I bet.
but he just said it a different way. He said,
Yeah,
oh yeah, that's what we meant.
yeah.
County by
No,
county. Yeah.
well, as someone who's straddling these two different audiences, I'm very intrigued by you also working with people in Canada. So, did they come to you and seek to use your organization to create local action?
Yes. Yes. But we've done shows. I've done a few shows out of Canada as well. And so, yeah, they came to us, and I could give you some first names of people that Ian from Canada is a staunch member. He's on our webinar every Wednesday. He loves what we're doing. He realizes that we have a solution. He also realizes the difficulty of applying some of this to Canada, but he wants to try and he wants to do it. The more people we get in Canada to do this and be a part of this, absolutely. We have Danielle, who's from Quebec. We have, oh, I can't remember his name. Oh, anyway, uh, but yeah, there's lots of people waking up in Canada and saying, you know what? There's a movement in America that we ought to get closer to. It's effective and it's peaceful. And folks, that's what you'll get from us. CSPOA was founded on courage, but and boldness, but absolute peaceful solutions. Absolute peaceful. And if your sheriff is doing that with you, I guarantee you it'll remain peaceful.
That's great. I'm really inspired by the work that you're doing, Sheriff Mack, and I think it's super important for people to take a look and to get inspired as well. Is there anything else that you really want to drive home for people? That any messages that you think are important right now with the current geopolitical context?
Well, I will tell you that some of you have probably heard that there have been judges across the country letting people out without bail and just putting them back on the streets. 6 weeks ago, the sheriff of Clark County, which is Las Vegas Metro, the police department is part of the Clark County Sheriff's Office in Las Vegas, and that's the way it should be nationwide. But the Clark County Sheriff, Kevin McMahill, told 4 different judges he was not going to release career, habitual, dangerous criminals back on the street. He says, I don't have to go along with you on this. I'm not going to. 11 different times with 4 different judges, and one judge threatened to hold him in contempt. He says, I don't care. Take me to court, whatever you want. I will fight this until the day I'm not sheriff anymore. As long as I'm sheriff, this will not happen. And so this is what we want from sheriffs nationwide. Just so happens, I gave him a copy of my Supreme Court case. I told him what this is about. I told him what the constitutional sheriff movement is about, and now he's doing it. We praise what he's doing. This is what the CSPOA is all about. We're asking you to be a part of this peaceful and effective solution.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I really I
My
look
pleasure.
forward to tracking your work and really to helping get the word into Canada as well. Quite frankly, I
Yeah.
think it's a really good resource for people to have.
I'll
Um,
let you know as the ebook for the book, the Democrat Murder of America,
yes,
should be out Wednesday or Thursday, and I'll get it to you. We probably should already be taking pre-orders, but we haven't set that up yet. But so as soon as either one of those are set up, I'll let you know, and we'll come back and hopefully get everybody to get that book.
that's great. We need the correction of history. I'm working on something that's framing the Canadian history similarly because
Ah,
there's a lot of lies here. In Canada, it wasn't like
uh,
America where there was a large industrial slavery sort of complex. When they arrived in
mhm.
Canada, actually the indigenous people had a massive human trafficking system, and they had lots of slavery. They had cannibalism. So actually, when they were arrived in Canada, it was the arrival of the colonialists here that actually ended human trafficking in Canada. So it's a
Yeah.
totally different story, but they still
Mhm.
try to take the story of it being founded on white supremacy and push it on Canadians
Oh,
when it's
yeah.
actually just not true at all. Not true at all.
No. Yeah.
So lots of work to do.
Folks, folks, we absolutely allow no racism or white supremacy in the CSPOA. Okay, so if I ever see any of that, I nip it in the bud right then and there. All are welcome, and I don't care. I don't care what your nationality is. I don't care who your daddy was, and I don't care what color you are. If you're willing to take my hand and stand with us in the cause of liberty, we're brothers and sisters.
Right on. Well, why don't you just can you give everyone any other links or any other resources you want to send them to before we wrap up?
The best one's just our website, CSPOA, Constitutional Sheriffs Peace Officers Association, CSPOA. No, you don't have to be a sheriff or a cop to join. Okay, all Americans should join. CSPOA.org.
Great. Thanks again, Sheriff Mack. I appreciate it so much.
We'll see you soon.